Sailing over 1,000 nautical miles from Vancouver Island, Canada to southeast Alaska, we've thrown this boat around, dipped the rails in the water, and bashed through swell after swell on our way to the land of mountain and ice.
And all the while, our electrical system has faithfully kept electrons running around a maze of copper wiring here on our boat. This might come as a shock, but electricity has always been the biggest challenge for the modern era sailor, and we're not talking about ships of the golden era of sailing, but regular folk like you and me. And our ship Uinta is a classic example of such a boat, coming from the fiberglass revolution of the mid-20th century. We've always known that she would need a complete electrical overhaul if we were to morph into the high-powered, electrically demanding digital nomads of our millennial dreams. Let me break down exactly what we've got going on here currently. We've got 3 100-watt solar panels, capturing electricity and sending it down below to our charge controllers, which takes that electricity and converts it to a charging current and then sends it on to our batteries. We have a battery charger that takes shore voltage and turns it into boat voltage to charge the batteries. We also have this alternator on the engine that creates 12-volt current when you're running the engine, and all of that power finds its way back here to our main star, our lithium iron phosphate bank, which is 400 amp hours of lithium ion power. We also have a lead acid bank, but we'll get chatting about that in a little bit. Uinta wasn't always a solar-charged, lithium-powered sailing machine. She was an electrical fire waiting to happen. Quite a spaghetti mess. Like, there's so much wire tucked in behind here, and it's run every different way. There was 45 years of previous users' modification. It was an absolute bird's nest of wires. There was wires changing gauge sizes. There was just things that shouldn't be in boats. It was a pretty tough job last year. It feels really good to have all of that work behind us so that we can bring Uinta into the 21st century with lithium power. Lithium technology has come a hell of a long way recently, and the market is changing. Thank you, capitalism. Demand for lithium iron phosphate cells has been increasing a lot lately. Like, all electric vehicles run on lithium, but lithium iron phosphate now occupies like 40% of that market, which is huge. It's just ever increasing. We've had a lot of inquiries from companies lately asking us to take a look at some of these lithium iron phosphate products. So LiTime has graciously sent us 2 200 amp hour self-heating lithium iron phosphate batteries for us to test out, shove in our boat, put through the ringer, and toss around on the ocean. Now, I know there's a lot of hesitancy surrounding putting lithium in boats, but hear us out, because I think the positive ions definitely outweigh the negative ions here. And to be clear, we're talking specifically about lithium iron phosphate. Lithium iron phosphate batteries are by far the safest type of lithium ion battery around. They're less prone to thermal runaway. The internal BMS in these batteries shuts the battery down if it starts to get too warm, which makes them not really ever catch on fire. I don't think there's been a single recorded case of a fire being started by a lithium iron phosphate battery. There has been fire started by lithium iron cobalt batteries, like you find in power tools, cell phones, laptops. I think there was one down in Miami recently that burnt down from an electric scooter, but not from these guys. These guys are incredibly safe. There's been tons of papers written on them from various different insurance companies that say lithium iron phosphate is by far the way to go. Now, I think the main advantage is that you get to use 100% of the advertised amp hour rating. So these 200 amp hour batteries, you get to use 200 amp hours of them. Compared to lead acid batteries, you're only getting to really discharge them to about 50% before you start to really damage the battery and shorten its cycle life. With our whole battery bank here, which is 400 amp hours of lithium, that would be the equivalent of having like 1200 amp hours of lead acid, or like 12 100 amp hour lead acid batteries, which would be absolutely huge. Lithium is much more energy dense than lead acid. Lead acid has about 50 to 70 watt hours per gram, whereas lithium is like 200 to 260. So that basically means that you're getting 3 to 5 times the amount of energy for the weight. 1200 amp hours of lead acid would be just like stupidly heavy. It would be like having an extra couple of bodies on board. It's like just a crazy amount of weight to put in your boat. Not to mention the size that would take up 200 kilos of lead acid batteries compared to 40 kilos of lithium batteries, which I think is a huge like weight saving, especially on a 30-foot sailboat like ours. So with all those benefits, we're pretty keen to put them to the test and see how they hold up as we sail north to Alaska. So let's get to installing them. Much like lead acid batteries, we just gotta put them into parallel. We have to connect the positive to the positive bus bar, and then we've got to run a wire from our negative back to the negative end of the shunt, which will help us to monitor all of our electricity. It's pretty straightforward, just gotta make some battery cables. We have some big, beefy 2-aught cable that our friend Brian here on the dock gave us. Super appreciative, Brian, for giving us this nice copper wire. It's very, very generous of you, and thank you for your amazing help getting our Dodger reattached to the boat. Cheers, mate. So yeah, really quite straightforward. Terminal ends, and then we just put them all together like you would any other battery. Fairly straightforward. We got the tools, we got the wire, we got the heat shrink, we got all the terminal ends, so let's do it. Apparently this stuff is stupidly expensive. It's like 15, 20 bucks a foot. And yes, I know that it is not tinned, but at this point we're about saving some money on this project, and Brian could help us out with this. And copper wire still works just as well. You just don't get seawater on it. Back in we go. Now that we have all of our wires made, we just have to connect them to the batteries, to the bus bars, and we can flick the charger on and see if they all start doing their thing. The other really cool pro to these batteries is that you can discharge them like thousands of times. With lead acid, generally you can only discharge them like about 1,000 times in their cycle life if you're taking really good care of them, you know, only discharging them down to 65%, topping them back up to 95%, discharging them back down. They really don't like to be, you know, blown through the boots. They don't like to go down to 10 volts. It really damages the lead acid. These guys, on the other hand, you can send these all the way down to like 1% and then recharge them all the way to 100, and you'll still get 3,000 to 4,000 charge cycles out of them. And in fact, LiTime claims that if you only discharge these down to 60%, like you would a regular lead acid, which is crazy because you're still getting 100 amp hours of use out of this, but this battery can have a charge cycle of 15,000 times, which makes the life cycle of this battery just like so much more bigger. So rather than trying to replace your lead acid bank every couple of years, these guys, you might look to replace them every decade or two or more longer. Still really new technology, so we don't quite know exactly how long they'll last, but that's really exciting because the cost factor, they are a little bit more pricey, but if the longevity of them is to be true, then that kind of skews that in a ridiculous way that makes these guys way cheaper in the long run. Okay, so we have our positive bus bar up over here. That's where all of our positives come together in our DC system. And then down here we have our DC shunt. So on the battery side of this is where we're going to connect the negatives of our lithium batteries. We're going to get that all hooked up. Okay, so the batteries are connected now, so we should be able to see them come up on the smart shunt when we turn our power back on. So, kind of the moment of truth, really. Will they blow up? Will we have lithium power? Let's find out.
Nothing is blowing up.
Nothing is blowing up, yeah.
So that's a good sign.
I'm looking at the battery charger. You can see that the battery isn't quite full, so the charger is putting out 25 amps and it's bringing the voltage up on the batteries. And then when you look at our smart shunt, you can see that we've got 24.5 amps going straight in. Awesome. We're just going to hook up our starter batteries. Pretty well the same process we just did. We're going to cut a couple of new cables for them so that everything is a bit neat and tidy. And we're going to get them installed, and then we can get our DC to DC charger hooked up. We can turn the engine over, and hopefully we can get out and go for a shakedown cruise. So with such a powerful player back here in Back 40, what's going on up here with our lead acid bank? Well, we've decided to keep our 200 amp hours of lead acid that we've always had in the boat. It's kind of like a redundancy clause. If these guys ever, get funny with the BMSs or shut down and we can't get them to turn back on, we can just hook up our good old-fashioned lead acid and run our boat the exact same way that we always have. We have a very small inboard diesel in our boat. It's a little 14 horsepower engine, and deep cycle batteries, they can turn it over really quite easily. You might not be able to turn over like a 70 horsepower diesel, but a little 14 starts just fine on these batteries. They have a second function as well though, because the alternator doesn't put out a charging current that is suitable for charging lead acid. The profiles just aren't compatible. We've left these in as kind of like an intermediate storage house for electricity so that the alternator can put power out, charge these batteries, because that's what it's always done. It just puts out good old-fashioned lead acid charging profile, It sends it into these lead acid batteries, and then we have our DC to DC charger that takes power out of the lead acid batteries, converts it into a lithium charging profile, and then sends it back over here to our lithium batteries so that they can charge efficiently from the alternator without damaging any of the other electrical components.
So we're coming at you in real time. We are now in Southeast Alaska in a small town called Petersburg, which is the little Norway of Alaska. Pretty cool place. Really stoked to show you guys the trip so far.
We've been waiting to make this video for quite some time because we really wanted to test the batteries out before we kind of actually give you our thoughts about them. And having sailed 600 nautical miles up here, we've thrown them around. The boat's been going through swells, pitching and roll, and we've been beating upwind in 25 knots. We've been sailing downwind in 25 knots.
Quite the mess down here. So you know you've had a good day of sailing when shit's everywhere.
Really thrown them through the ringer. We've discharged them right down to the floor. We've recharged them all the way up to the top. They've been absolutely rock solid.
We're not necessarily saying you need to buy this brand, but
we're really stoked at the way that these batteries have impacted our cruising. We have so much more power nowadays, and we don't even really think about our power consumption anymore. We leave the inverter running overnight accidentally. We leave our anchor light running on during the day because, you know, we forget to turn it off now because we're not constantly like concerned about how much power we're using.
Yeah, we're pretty well lit up like a Christmas tree, which is hilarious for two people who were eating by candlelight for the last 3 years. Yeah, they've really worked out for us. I don't think they're going to self-destruct.
Yeah, and that's most people's fear, is that they're just going to one day spontaneously ignite, and that's just not the case.
We were pretty overwhelmed when we started out with this lithium project. We had so many questions, and there are so many brands and different price points, and we were just like, are these batteries better than these ones?
There's actually a lot of really cool videos out there on the internet of people opening these batteries up. They take a Sawzall, cut them open, and you can actually see what the inside of the battery looks like. When I was doing the research for this collaboration, it was something that I was really curious about, looking at the build standards between what LiTime was going to send us versus some of the other battery companies out there like Battleborn batteries or Energy or, you know, Victron batteries or some of the other like big players in the industry. And what I found out is that like really the inside of the batteries, they all come from the same people, they all come from the same factories at some point in the supply chain. So whether you're buying Battleborn batteries or whether you're buying LiTime or whether you're buying Victron, the cells that actually are the electronical components are kind of all the same at the end of the day. We know captains who have built their own batteries and have sailed like thousands of miles across oceans with them, and they're still working absolutely fine. One guy in our marina actually ordered the individual cells and wired them all together himself, and he's been running that in his boat for a couple of years now. No fires. We did a ton of research. There was so much to consider when changing your boat system over to accommodating lithium batteries. They're definitely not drop-in replacements for lead acid. They charge completely different from lead acid batteries. You got to upgrade a lot of other components in your boat, which worked fine for us because we kind of did a whole electrical overhaul and replaced everything anyway. But if you would just take your lead acid out and put in the lithium batteries, then that is definitely not going to work. It's really recommended that if you're going to drop in a lithium batteries into your boat, that the rest of your DC system and your charging system meets the ABYC standards for electricity on boats. It's a set of standards that just make sure that everything has the right breakers, the right wire gauges, sizes, and everything else that's super nerdy and kind of pretty interesting actually, just to make sure that safety on the boat is essential, because while there's been no fires from the lithium batteries themselves, lots of fires happen from incorrectly installed electrical systems on boats. So that's really the key here, is the batteries themselves are not really dangerous. It's kind of like having any other fuel that we mitigate the risks for. And in that concept, like lithium iron phosphate batteries are no different. You just have to take the appropriate safety precautions, and really it should be absolutely fine. The batteries that LiTime sent us are 200 amp hour batteries. They're 2,560 watt hours. They have a self-heating pad in them. When the BMS senses that they're below zero and they're wanting to accept the current, they actually have a heating pad that heats the battery back up to a temperature that will accept a current. So that's a really cool feature. Not that I think it's really gonna impact us on our boat, because in the Pacific Northwest, the boat never really gets below zero that often. If you were in part of the world where your boat does freeze and you do winterize your boat, it might be an idea to then take the batteries out like you would when you're winterizing your engine and everything else. They have a low temperature shutoff protection, so when it is less than zero, they won't accept a charge, and when it's less than minus 20 Celsius, they won't discharge anymore. They're made from grade A lithium iron phosphate cells, so they're the same cells that you would find in an electric vehicle. They're rated for 4,000 discharges at 100% or 15,000 discharges at 60%, which I think is phenomenal. That means you can recharge them and discharge them for a real long time. One thing to consider is that they do have a 100 amp BMS in them, so if you have a 120 amp alternator or a bigger alternator on your engine, the batteries can only accept 100 amps at any given time, or discharge 100 amps at any given time. So that's a consideration if you have a more higher powered boat than us. Not really a problem for us because we only make like 17 amps of solar power or like 30 amps of power off the engine. So not really a worry for us, but just something to consider. The batteries are IP65 rated, so they're completely sealed from dust intrusion, and you can apparently spray them down with a pressure washer and they won't leak water, so I think that's really good.
Actually, when we were filming this and trying to get some photos, the sky opened up and bucketed rain, and we were like bringing the batteries downstairs. So yeah, they got totally soaked and they're working fine right now. So yeah, we really put them through the ringer.
We really have. Would they survive a knockdown? I mean, I don't really know, but I think if our boat got knocked down, we would have so many other problems on our hands. Battery surviving a knockdown is kind of like fairly low on the list of priorities at that point.
So we had to do a lot of research when we started out on this project and in order to make this video, and we were very overwhelmed at first, and we're feeling a lot better with the information now. So if you have any questions at all about lithium and doing a lithium install on your boat, drop them down in the comments. We'll try to answer as many as we can. Definitely open to discussion about any of the stuff we talked about. Thank you guys for watching. Give this one a thumbs up if it was informative or helpful. We'll be back next week when we get off the dock and actually head up here to Alaska. Once we leave here, we are into big glacier territory, navigating our boat through ice and icebergs and bergy bits, and that's so crazy. We can't even believe we're about to do that. So stoked to show you guys all of that. So yeah, we'll see you guys next week.
Yeah, we'll see you next time, guys.
Cheers.